So for today's video, I'm going to be ranking for you my entire Blu-ray watch list from last month, March 2023, including 3 movies that Warner Archive released, including 3 movies that I bought randomly from Warner Archive that I showed you in a haul video recently, and a lot of John Carpenter movies. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, my name's Daniel. Welcome again to the Cobwebs channel, and let's jump right into this ranking of 15 Blu-rays. Like I always say, these don't have to be movies I've never seen before. They just have to be Blu-rays that I own and just had never popped in my player before. But I did last month. It's kind of a good mix of classic film, and I got a good bit of like 70s and 80s stuff. Let's actually jump right into it with a 90s movie, which is at the bottom of my list. From 1993, this is My Boyfriend's Back, a Kino Lorber Blu-ray release of a horror comedy in which a young man is very much in love with the most beautiful girl in school. He's a high schooler, but he can't get up the courage to ask her out. And when he's trying to finally ask her out to the prom, he accidentally dies. And he comes back from the dead as a zombie. And what do you know? She kind of falls in love with him after he's become a zombie. And what are they going to do about this? I was not a big fan of this movie. I thought it was kind of okay. I like horror comedies. I generally like horror comedies from this era. This is a 90s movie, but it feels kind of behind the times. It's very much an 80s movie. Like, you would guess it was an 80s movie if you watched it. And one reason it didn't really work for me is I'm not a big fan of movies where the main character is like kind of a weak, whiny guy who's like the nice guy, but he's always whining about how, oh, the beautiful girl, she'll never fall in love with me, blah, blah, blah. But I'm almost like, I don't know, she's always like super beautiful and smart and nice in all these movies. And I'm like, I think she probably deserves better than whiny you. And that's kind of how I felt about this. I didn't find the main character very likable. The vibe of it kind of reminded me of a Jim Carrey horror comedy called Once Bitten, where he becomes a vampire. And I like that movie way more. So if you've never seen Once Bitten, I would watch that and not My Boyfriend's Back. Next up at number 14, we've got Camille, which Warner Archive released on Blu-ray just last month. I've talked about this in a couple of videos already. It is a period piece romantic drama in which Greta Garbo plays what is basically a lady of the night. She sort of like gets a very lavish lifestyle paid for by being a companion to rich men, but she falls in love for real with a poorer man played by Robert Taylor. And, you know, Greta Garbo's great in this movie, but honestly, one great performance is not enough to make a movie for me. And the more I think about this movie, the more I think I'll probably never watch it again. I didn't find the main relationship very engaging because of the poorer performance by Robert Taylor. I don't think he's a particularly good actor. Certainly doesn't stand up to Greta Garbo. And the movie, it just drags a little bit, to be honest with you. I would say if you want to watch a Greta Garbo romance movie, go with Ernst Lubitsch's Ninotchka. So much better. Next up, Warner Archive release of Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. Showed you this in a haul video that I did just last month. It is a 1970s TV movie, one of the most iconic horror TV movies. And it stars Kim Darby as a woman who starts to suspect there's something spooky going on with her new house. And of course, her husband doesn't believe her and he's a workaholic. That's kind of a cliche. That's how a lot of these movies end up going. And I thought it was an okay movie. I think it's got some creepy moments. I really like the creature stuff. You kind of think this is going to be a ghost movie. It's not really that. It's actually got these creatures in it, and I really like that. But being a TV movie, it just feels like it's ramping up to something that it just never quite gets there. It's got a decent ending, but I thought it needed something a little bit poppier, and it just didn't really have that. I also was not a big fan of Kim Darby's performance in the lead. She seems strangely miscast because she looks super young and like she's very much playing like what feels like a middle-aged housewife, and her husband looks like way older than her. She kind of just comes across like a teenager. She's actually got a friend character who is this, you know, beautiful, like late 30s probably woman who feels like she fits in this movie, and Kim Darby just kind of doesn't. It's very odd casting. But I thought it was an okay movie. I'm glad I bought it. I'm glad I watched it. It might be like a Halloween watch in the future. Not bad, but just not great. Next up, Scream Factory. We got a Scream Factory Blu-ray of Firestarter. Now, I said we're going to talk about a lot of John Carpenter movies in this video. We are. I've been on a big John Carpenter kick. I'll talk about that later. But that led me to this movie because John Carpenter almost directed this movie. But the failure of The Thing made them slash the budget way down because they were afraid of giving John Carpenter much money to work with, if you can believe that. And he ended up leaving the project, and he went off and did Christine instead. But Mark L. Lester ended up directing this, who's also kind of a pretty good director. He directed movies like Showdown Little Tokyo, Commando, Class of 1984, I believe it is. These just solid genre movies. And I would say Firestarter is not as good as any of those. Based on a Stephen King novel, and it's about a man who has some supernatural powers that he got from a government experiment, on the run with his daughter, who got even more supernatural powers and being able to set fires with her mind. They're on the run from the government because the government wants to capture them and do experiments on them. That's kind of a, kind of a cliched story right there. But I thought it was solid. Like, I thought it looked beautiful. It doesn't sustain a terribly interesting story throughout, and it definitely slows down, especially towards the middle. But it's got a George C. Scott performance that I really appreciated. George C. Scott is playing a Native American villain in this. And of course, George C. Scott is not Native American. That's weird casting right there. And of course, it's not good to cast non-Native Americans as Native Americans. It's not a good thing to do. But I liked his performance a lot. I gotta say, he was the most entertaining part of the movie for me. But Drew Barrymore, there's kind of alternate cover art you can see right in there. Drew Barrymore plays the little girl. This is 1984, so it's not long after she did E.T. She's very good in it too. I just thought it was solid, and it's got great, like, amazing practical fire effects. And a remake came out of this last year. I didn't watch it, but I heard it has just a lot of bad fire CGI. This is practical fire effects that were really impressive. Next up, Confessions of a Nazi Spy. Warner Archive released this last month, and it's an interesting historical curiosity because it's very much a political piece trying to push America into World War II because it came out before America actually joined World War II. As a movie, the storytelling is not very sophisticated. It relies a lot on narration. It doesn't really have a main character, but it's definitely an interesting watch, and I found it plenty entertaining enough to justify the time. Next, The Picture of Dorian Gray. By far not one of the worst movies I watched last month, but the most disappointing because I was expecting something truly amazing, and I didn't feel like I got that. So it's based on the Oscar Wilde story of The Picture of Dorian Gray, in which a young, handsome man sells his soul in exchange for eternal youth and eternal beauty, and all the while a painting of him is what ages and decrepits as he gets older and also as he gets more evil. It's a classic story. It actually reminds me a lot of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story in certain ways. I feel like those two stories go hand in hand a bit. And while the 1930s version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is amazing with Frederick March, that's a pre-code movie, and that movie goes pretty hard on making you understand Mr. Hyde is evil. This is 1945, and you don't see very much of Dorian Gray's evil. A lot of it is implied, which doesn't make you feel the horror of the story quite as much, which is a bit of a problem. But for me, the biggest problem was the lead performance. Herb Hatfield plays Dorian Gray, and I just disagree with the general consensus on this guy because I was looking at Letterboxd, looking at people I follow, people I respect. A lot of people were saying it's a great performance. One person I respect said it's one of the all-time great performances. I don't see it, guys. Like, I thought he was super flat. Like, it was one of the most wooden performances I have seen in a long time. A block of wood, no charm, no humor to him, no humanity. I think that's kind of the point. I think they were going for cold and unemotional. But cold and unemotional is kind of a boring lead character to follow. Now, on the flip side, George Sanders plays his friend. I've talked about George Sanders. I really like him. The movie sings when George Sanders is on screen. He's phenomenal. His dialogue is so good because he's this kind of rotten guy who's very proud of how rotten he is and boasts about it constantly. And so, like, beautifully and eloquently articulates why he's such a terrible person. And it's really, really entertaining. I love George Sanders in this. But the movie also relies on narration a lot. Not narration from Dorian Gray, just an omnipotent narrator. And it feels like, again, it's not very sophisticated storytelling, frankly. There is a really cool reveal when you see the Dorian Gray painting. That's awesome. Unfortunately, somebody on Twitter spoiled it for me. Like, I posted my haul video of this and someone just commented, "Oh, here's what the painting looks like." It's a bit of a bummer. It would have been nice, but I realized it came out in 1945. I can't complain too much about spoilers. I thought it was okay. I just thought it suffered from narration that bogged things down and a bad lead performance, but that's just me. A lot of people think it's amazing. I just thought it was decent. Next up, Flamingo Road. Okay, I said in my video about last month's Warner Archive releases that Confessions of a Nazi Spy was my favorite of the three. I changed my mind the more I think about it. I think Flamingo Road is definitely the better movie. Nazi Spy is just such an audacious movie, the kind of thing that never gets made, and it was surprising. But this is just more of a typical, just solid, good movie. It's the movie I'd be more likely to rewatch. It's Michael Curtiz, it's Joan Crawford. It's got a great supporting performance from Sydney Greenstreet. It's definitely a solid movie. It just suffered for me personally because I just saw Mildred Pierce for the first time, and this movie feels a little bit like a Mildred Pierce copy, similar people involved, and it's got somewhat of a similar story, but not as good as Mildred Pierce. Okay, at number 8, I told you there's going to be a lot of John Carpenter movies, and we got the first one, Someone's Watching Me, which is a TV movie he made in 1978. Okay, here's the thing. I'm not going to talk too much about this in this video because I'm planning a John Carpenter dedicated video I'm going to do soon. But John Carpenter was the first director that I considered my favorite director in my life. And then I just kind of forgot about that, and I moved on to discovering other things, and I just kind of, other than rewatching a few favorites, I mostly left my John Carpenter love behind me and didn't think about it that much. This month, I felt the need to dive back into his filmography, and I realized, yes, he is my favorite director. So I'm declaring that John Carpenter is my favorite director. And Someone's Watching Me was one I'd never seen before. I decided I'm going to watch all the movies I'd never seen from him this year, sooner rather than later. And so this is a TV movie he made in 1978. I believe he made it before Halloween, but it came out after Halloween, I'm pretty sure. And it is a thriller starring Lauren Hutton, and she is a woman who seems to be escaping a previous bad workplace situation because of some harassment. She moves to a new town, gets a new job, and she discovers that there is a man who is stalking her, giving her creepy phone calls, sending her creepy stuff to her house. And that's about as far as it goes for a while, but it's really creeping her out. And it's just got some really good, tense John Carpenter sequences. This is not a flashy movie, but it is very well directed. It gets the job done as just a tense, paranoid thriller. I really liked Adrienne Barbeau as her friend. I really like the guy who plays her love interest in this movie. It's a good cast. It's an effective thriller, and I liked it. Another good movie from John Carpenter. Next up, this is super random. Deadly Friend. Wes Craven's Deadly Friend. This is the Scream Factory Blu-ray. And I'd seen this movie before, but I bought the Scream Factory Blu-ray when it came out last year. I think it came out around last Halloween. And I just hadn't watched it yet. There's actually alternate cover art to this that I want to switch it around to. So I hadn't watched the actual Scream Factory Blu-ray yet. And I rewatched it because, we were just really busy all day, and I got home and I just wanted to kick back and relax with something comforting. And The Deadly Friend fits that bill for me. I really like this movie. It's not a great movie. It's really dumb in a lot of ways. It is about a high school boy who is a child prodigy who builds a robot that's his little robot friend. He makes friends with the girl next door, who's played by Kristy Swanson, kind of a mainstay of 80s teen movies. And he kind of falls in love with her, but then something terrible happens to her. And he does this kind of Dr. Frankenstein-like routine with his robot to bring her back from the dead. And it's very goofy. It's very cheesy. There's stuff in this movie that people will point to and say, this movie is bad because of this, like especially the ending. But all those things just make it more charming for me, honestly. Like, it's one of those movies that's really dumb, and I just enjoy the hell out of it. It's just got that 80s suburbia atmosphere. It's got a Frankenstein flair to it. And there's a sequence that takes place on Halloween. It just kind of pushes all my buttons. I love Wes Craven. Of the 70s, 80s horror masters, John Carpenter, of course, is my favorite. Wes Craven, clearly my second favorite. At number 6, my favorite movie I watched from Warner Archive this month, and that was While the City Sleeps, which is a 1950s thriller. There is a serial killer going around town killing women, and that way it feels like a bit of a precursor to the giallo genre. And it's not a mystery. The movie tells you who the killer is right away. And he's got kind of like a psychosexual motive that feels like a precursor to Psycho, and then again, a precursor to giallo. So it's a really interesting curiosity for all those reasons. But also a lot of the movie has to do with a power grab at a media empire in which the owner of it dies. His son, played by Vincent Price, love seeing Vincent Price in any movie ever. He takes over, and he's kind of weak and not good with business, and he's trying to pick somebody to run the business. And 3 guys are vying for it. And a lot of the movie has to do with that, which I might think is bad, but I really like that too. So you kind of got these 2 movies going on at the same time, and the serial killer stuff comes in because all of them figure if I solve the killing, I'll probably probably get this job. Dana Andrews is the lead. He's kind of the best guy who works for the media company, but doesn't actually want the job. And I really liked him in the movie, even though he's a very flawed character. The movie is very much about desire for power, unfulfilled sexual desire that turns you to killing in the terms of the killer, a lot of sexual desire between a lot of the characters. It may be a 1950s movie, but it's a horny movie. I'm just going to say that. Like, it clearly is, especially stuff between like Dana Andrews and his fiance, who's played by, I believe, Rhonda Fleming, and Dana Andrews and Ida Lupino, because Ida Lupino is in this movie too. George Sanders is in this movie, also great in this. Not as good as he was in Portrait of Dorian Gray, but also good in this. I think it's a really solid 1950s thriller. Like, I don't know how else to sell it than that. Good movie. Next up, from Kino Lorber, The Woman in the Window. This movie has been recommended by you guys, comments in my videos so many times. I've gotten so many comments on my videos that say, hey, you got to watch Woman in the Window with Edward G. Robinson. Here I am. I finally checked it out. So Edward G. Robinson plays a professor who seems to be going through something of a midlife crisis. And when his wife and kid go away for a summer in the country or something like that, he starts to contemplate some adventure and maybe an affair, and he runs into Joan Bennett, who he had been admiring a painting of for quite some time, and he really starts to contemplate having an affair. He goes back to her apartment with her, and through somebody coming over, a jealous boyfriend, and some unfortunate happenstance, jealous boyfriend ends up dead. And Edward G. Robinson then decides, well, I can't call the police, especially because I can't be seen at this woman's apartment while my wife is away. I'm going to have to get rid of this body and cover this up. And the rest of the movie is Edward G. Robinson and Joan Bennett covering up this murder, trying to keep it covered up. And it's really interesting because Edward G. Robinson is good friends with the district attorney of the town who's investigating this murder very intensely. And Edward G. Robinson even gets to come with him on some of the murder investigation stuff. And he's just standing right there while his friend is investigating this, just hoping not to get caught. It is brutally intense. It is so intense that it was almost unpleasant to watch at times. Like, I was blown away by this movie for a while. And for a while I was watching it and I was thinking, this is like one of the top discoveries of the year for me. Like, this is going to top my list for this month. Like, this is going to be amazing. Then the ending happens. And look, I'm not going to complain about the ending. I understand it's a pretty audacious thing to do. And I saw some Letterboxd reviews of some people really like that. But it didn't work for me. I was pretty disappointed in the ending. And the ending is a reason that I feel like I have a hard time imagining myself rewatching it because of knowing how it ends. So I didn't like the ending. I was disappointed, but it didn't take too much away. I still gave it 4 stars on Letterboxd. I'm still putting it at my number 5 for the month. Like, it was a really good experience watching it. Man, I just wish it ended before the twist, the thing happened. Like, if it just ended before that, I would have loved it. I might have given it 5 stars. Like, I would have loved it. So it's a good movie. I recommend it. Oh, by the way, it's a Fritz Lang movie, and so is this. I forgot to mention that. Both Fritz Lang movies. I love Fritz Lang. It's cool having him have back-to-back movies on this list. So Woman in the Window it's great for a while. Do you like the ending? If you love the ending, The Woman in the Window, tell me down below. Just don't spoil it, because some people, they might not know. Okay, next up, we got John Carpenter's Village of the Damned, which, if you've seen Scream Factory's sell this one, it's a Scream Factory disc, you're probably going to see this cover art. That's Scream Factory's original cover art. I don't like that cover art. I like the original poster, so that's what I put this on as. This was one of the John Carpenter movies I'd never seen before. I'm a fan of the original. I have the Warner Archive Blu-ray, The Village of the Damned from 1960. Had never seen this remake. And going in, I understood it doesn't have a good reputation, but I went in keeping an open mind, and I loved this movie. I thought it was really good. I thought it was a really solid remake. All right, first thing that made me fall in love with it is the look of it. John Carpenter movies tend to look beautiful. They have beautiful widescreen photography. That's what this movie very much has. And it takes place in a very rural atmosphere of a small middle America town with a lot of farmland around. And I love movies with that atmosphere. Everything in the movie looks gorgeous. It's so beautiful. I was such a fan of just looking at this film. And it also opens at like this fall festival with pumpkins and scarecrows around. And that's like the quickest way to my heart right there. I love fall festivals, pumpkin scarecrows. I'm in. Pumpkin spice. I'm that kind of guy, I guess. It's got a great cast of people like Christopher Reeve and Kirstie Alley. I thought Christopher Reeve was a great main character for this, held up with George Sanders in the original. George Sanders is like the star of this video. It's also got Mark Hamill as like as the pastor of this town as well, which was good to see. It took some interesting deviations from the original. There's some increased just creepy imagery to this because it's John Carpenter. It's the 90s. He's got to do stuff like that. It's also got some increased sympathetic elements to some of the villains, but in most ways it very much follows the original story. I just thought it inherits a really good story from the original, but it benefits from beautiful John Carpenter photography and atmosphere, a great John Carpenter score. I love John Carpenter scores, and this one has a phenomenal one, and all the performances are really solid. I haven't seen the original in too long to tell you which one I like better. You know, I might have to hand it to the original just because it's the one that did it first, although it's still based on a book, so they're both based on something. But there's more than enough different about this and good about this to justify putting this in instead of the original sometimes. I thought it was really good. Yet another movie I like from John Carpenter. This is like the John Carpenter block right here. So next we've got Starman, a movie I'd seen before, just never the Scream Factory Blu-ray. I finally bought it this month. And this movie came out because The Thing bombed. John Carpenter's The Thing did terribly at the box office because E.T. did really well and people wanted to see friendly aliens. So that seems to be why John Carpenter made this movie. It was a for-hire job, a script that was going around that they just wanted him to direct. It's a friendly alien movie in which Karen Allen from Raiders of the Lost Ark is mourning the death of her husband, played by Jeff Bridges, and an alien comes down and it just latches onto the first DNA it finds, which it finds a hair from her dead husband, latches onto that DNA, forms into his form. So the alien just takes the form of her deceased husband. So it's Jeff Bridges. And they end up going on a road trip together so he can find his spaceship so he can go back into space. Because if he doesn't in like 3 days or something, he dies. I think this is a beautiful movie. It is a beautiful, meaningful romance between Jeff Bridges and Karen Allen. They're both great in the movie. Jeff Bridges was nominated for an Oscar for this movie and it was well deserved. He's great in the movie. It's a very unconventional performance, but a bold one, and it paid off. Of course, because it's John Carpenter, it looks and sounds amazing. There's an element to this movie that I'd forgotten because I hadn't seen it in a long time and it wasn't as meaningful to me the first time I saw it. But what this experience with this alien leaves Karen Allen with, what he leaves her with, I'm not going to spoil it, is so beautiful and meaningful, especially considering how she starts this story out. And it makes me feel like this is as meaningful a story for adults as E.T. is for children. And that's how I'd say it. If E.T. is just so meaningful for little kids, Starman is that for adults. I think it's beautiful. I think it's great. I think it's top tier John Carpenter. Next up, Assault on Precinct 13, which is a movie I love, and I just never watched the Scream Factory Blu-ray before. I first watched it from Netflix DVD, actually. You guys remember Netflix DVD? I think they still exist. I'm just not a subscriber anymore, but I was for a long time. This is Scream Factory's steelbook of Assault on Precinct 13. John Carpenter's first real movie. He did Dark Star first, but it was basically a student film. Then he did Assault on Precinct 13, which is an homage to Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo, a story in which the officers and the incarcerated at a police precinct had to defend themselves from an onslaught of an insane, violent gang who wants to kill them all. So it's a siege movie. I think this is one of John Carpenter's best movies. I do. I think it's an incredible action film, but I think it has a great script. The tight and effective storytelling of this is so efficient and so good. The action is all really well done. I love the characters. There's particularly one character who's a criminal, and he seems very much like the John Wayne approximation. This movie is an homage to Rio Bravo, but he feels very much like Ringo, John Wayne's character from Stagecoach. I love that character. He's my favorite. He has so much great dialogue. There's just so much great dialogue in this movie. Assault on Precinct 13 is an exploitation action movie, but done right with a great script and a truly, of course, great director, who gives it a great score, of course. But at the top is one of my favorite horror films of all time. That's Dario Argento's Phenomena. Now, I watched this because I actually did a podcast on it on the Film Feast podcast. The Film Feast podcast is one of my favorite podcasts about movies. My friend Matt Bledsoe hosts that, and he's nice enough to have me on sometimes. And he had me on as a guest to talk about this movie. In addition to John Carpenter, I'm also a big fan of Dario Argento, and this is one of my favorite movies from Dario Argento. It came out in 1985, starring Jennifer Connelly as a little girl who has a psychic connection to bugs, and the psychic connection to those bugs helps her solve the murders of this psycho who's going around killing the girls that live at her boarding school. And so it's a really weird plot, and it's got Donald Pleasance as this insect scientist who also helps her out along the way. It's got some grisly murder sequences, and it's got an insane finale, like one of the craziest horror finales of all time. But other than that, I just think it's kind of like a charming, quaint story about just a kid solving murders with her weird crippled scientist friend played by Donald Pleasance. I think it's so satisfying and fun. Like John Carpenter movies, Dario Argento movies also tend to have amazing scores. This one does as well, and amazing photography that I believe was primarily done in Switzerland, and just one of the most bonkers endings you'll ever see to any horror movie ever. So that's my number one. A rewatch, of course. I'd seen it several times before, just never actually owned it. Actually, this was another one that I first watched on Netflix DVD service, and then the next time I watched it was on Shudder, and then I finally bought the Synapse Blu-ray and watched it on there. So that's it, folks. My ranking of every Blu-ray I watched for the first time in the month of March. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought of this video. If there's any movies you're hoping to check out. What were your favorite movies of March? I would love to know. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, a subscribe if you haven't yet, because we've got more videos like this coming very soon. I'll see you then.